The unemployment rate reached nearly 30% in 1932. The German political landscape was dramatically altered, leading to Adolf Hitler's rise to power. The Nazi Party rose from being peripheral to winning 18.3% of the vote in the September 1930 election, and the Communist Party also made gains, while moderate forces like the Social Democratic Party, the Democratic Party, and the People's Party lost seats. The next 2 years were marked by increased street violence between Nazis and Communists, while governments under President Paul von Hindenburg increasingly relied on rule by decree, bypassing the Reichstag. Hitler ran for the presidency in 1932, and while he lost to the incumbent Hindenburg in the election, it marked a point during which both Nazi Party and the Communist parties rose in the years following the crash to altogether possess a Reichstag majority following the general election in July 1932. Although the Nazis lost seats in November 1932 election, they remained the largest party, and Hitler was appointed as chancellor the following January. The government formation deal was designed to give Hitler's conservative coalition partners many checks on his power. But over the next few months, the Nazis maneuvered to consolidate a single-party dictatorship. Hitler followed an economic policy of autarky, creating a network of client states and economic allies in Central Europe and Latin America. By cutting wages and taking control of labor unions, plus public work spending, unemployment fell significantly by 1935. Large-scale military spending played a major role in the recovery. The policies had the effect of driving up the cost of food imports and depleting foreign currency reserves, leading to economic impasse by 1936. Nazi Germany faced a choice of either reversing course or pressing ahead with rearmament and autarky. Hitler chose the latter route, which, according to Ian Kershaw, could only be partially accomplished without territorial expansion, and therefore war. Greece. The reverberations of the Great Depression hit Greece in 1932. The Bank of Greece tried to adopt deflationary policies to stave off the crises that were going on in other countries, but these largely failed. For a brief period, the drachma was pegged to the U.S. dollar, but this move was unsustainable given the country's large trade deficit, and the only long-term effect of this was Greece's foreign exchange reserves being almost totally wiped out in 1932. Remittances from abroad declined sharply, and the value of the drachma began to plummet from 77 drachmas to the dollar in March 1931 to 111 drachmas to the dollar in April 1931. This transition was especially harmful to Greece, as the country relied on imports from the UK, France, and the Middle East for many necessities. Greece went off the gold standard in April 1932 and declared a moratorium on all interest payments. The country also adopted protectionist policies, such as import quotas, which several European countries also did during the period. Protectionist policies, coupled with a weak drachma and the stifling of imports, allowed the Greek industry to expand during the Great Depression. In 1939, the Greek industrial output was 179% that of 1928. These industries were, for the most part, built on sand. As one report of the Bank of Greece put it, as without massive protection, they would not have been able to survive. Despite the global depression, Greece managed to suffer comparatively little, averaging a growth rate of 3.5% from 1932 to 1939. The dictatorial regime of Ioannis Metaxas took over the Greek government in 1936, and economic growth was strong in the years leading up to the Second World War. Iceland's post-World War I prosperity came to an end with the outbreak of the Great Depression. The Depression hit Iceland hard as the value of exports plummeted. The total value of Icelandic exports fell from 74 million kronur in 1929 to 48 million in 1932, and was not to rise again to the pre-1930 level until after 1939. Government interference in the economy increased. Imports were regulated. Trade with foreign currency was monopolized by state-owned banks, and loan capital was largely distributed by state-regulated funds. Due to the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, which cut Iceland's exports of saltfish by half, the Depression lasted in Iceland until the outbreak of World War II, when prices for fish exports soared. India. How much India was affected by the Great Depression has been debated. Historians have argued that it slowed long-term industrial development. Apart from two sectors, jute and coal, the economy was little affected. However, there were major negative impacts on the jute industry as world demand fell and prices plunged. Otherwise, conditions were fairly stable. Local markets in agriculture and small-scale industry showed modest gains. Ireland Frank Barry and Mary E. Daly have argued that Ireland was a largely agrarian economy, trading almost exclusively with the UK at the time of the Great Depression. Beef and dairy products comprised the bulk of exports, and Ireland fared well relative to many other commodity producers, particularly in the early years of the Depression. Italy. The Great Depression hit Italy very hard. As industries came close to failure, they were bought out by the banks in a largely illusionary bailout. The assets used to fund the purchases were largely worthless. This led to a financial crisis peaking in 1932 and major government intervention. The Industrial Reconstruction Institute, IRI, was formed in January 1933 and took control of the bank-owned companies, suddenly giving Italy the largest state-owned industrial sector in Europe, excluding the USSR. IRI did rather well with its new responsibilities, restructuring, modernizing, and rationalizing as much as it could. It was a significant factor in post-1945 development. But it took the Italian economy until 1935 to recover the manufacturing levels of 1930, a position that was only 60% better than that of 1913. Japan. The Great Depression did not strongly affect Japan. The Japanese economy shrank by 8% during 1929 to 31. Japan's finance minister, Takahashi Korekiyo, was the first to implement what have come to be identified as Keynesian economic policies. First, by large fiscal stimulus involving deficit spending, and second, by devaluing the currency. Takahashi used the Bank of Japan to sterilize the deficit spending and minimize resulting inflationary pressures. Econometric studies have identified the fiscal stimulus as especially effective. The devaluation of the currency had an immediate effect. Japanese textiles began to displace British textiles in export markets. The deficit spending proved to be most profound and went into the purchase of munitions for the armed forces. By 1933, Japan was already out of the Depression. By 1934, Takahashi realized that the economy was in danger of overheating, and to avoid inflation, he moved to reduce the deficit spending that went towards armaments and munitions. This resulted in a strong and swift negative reaction from nationalists, especially those in the army, culminating in his assassination in the course of the February 26th incident. This had a chilling effect on all civilian bureaucrats in the Japanese government. From 1934, the military's dominance of the government continued to grow. Instead of reducing deficit spending, the government introduced price controls and rationing schemes that reduced but did not eliminate inflation, which remained a problem until the end of World War II. The deficit spending had a transformative effect on Japan. Japan's industrial production doubled during the 1930s. Further, in 1929, the list of the largest firms in Japan was dominated by light industries, especially textile companies. Many of Japan's automakers, such as Toyota, have their roots in the textile industry. By 1940, light industry had been displaced by heavy industry as the largest firms inside the Japanese economy, Latin America. Because of high levels of U.S. investment in Latin American economies, they were severely damaged by the Depression. Within the region, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru were particularly badly affected. Before the 1929 crisis, links between the world economy and Latin American economies had been established through American and British investment in Latin American exports to the world. As a result, Latin American export industries felt the Depression quickly. World prices for commodities such as wheat, coffee, and copper plunged. Exports from all of Latin America to the U.S. fell in value from $1.2 billion in 1929 to $335 million in 1933, rising to $660 million in 1940. But on the other hand, the Depression led the area governments to develop new local industries and expand consumption and production. Following the example of the New Deal, governments in the area approved regulations and created or improved welfare institutions that helped millions of new industrial workers to achieve a better standard of living. Netherlands. From roughly 1931 to 1937, the Netherlands suffered a deep and exceptionally long depression. This depression was partly caused by the after-effects of the American stock market crash of 1929 and partly by internal factors in the Netherlands. Government policy, especially the very late dropping of the gold standard, played a role in prolonging the depression. The Great Depression in the Netherlands led to some political instability and riots and can be linked to the rise of the Dutch fascist political party, NSB. The depression in the Netherlands eased off somewhat at the end of 1936, when the government finally dropped the gold standard, but real economic stability did not return until after World War II.